Looking to have your groceries delivered? Try Instacart. By following the link in the show notes, you can shop multiple stores, get the products you love from local stores, get your delivery in as fast as 1 hour. Plus, Instacart highlights deals to save you money. And for our listeners, free delivery on your first order over $35. Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from ItalianGenealogy.blog, and I'm here today with Paul Trahan up in the Massachusetts area, and he's going to talk to us about his family research from Sant'Angelo, Alaska. How are things up there in the far northeast?
It's nice. It's a little overcast today, still a little humid, but overall the summer is going wonderfully. Thank you.
Here too, actually, I'm 3 blocks from the beach here in Bradley Beach, and we have a really nice sea breeze today. It was quite pleasant this morning.
I'm just north of Boston. I'm right now on Revere Beach, which is the first public beach in the United States. And yeah, it's a beautiful day. Very quiet. Not a lot of people on the beach today, but it's a beautiful day.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you the first question I ask everybody, which is when and why did you start researching your family?
I actually am relatively new to this. I started about 3 years ago. What started it off was the commercials from Ancestry, where it was, we thought we were German our whole lives, and it turns out we were Scottish. And one Thanksgiving, my brother and I and my mother were talking, and we were talking about those commercials. And, we said, well, Mom always claims that she's 100% Italian. And my brother said, well, how do you know? And she, very defensive, good old Italian mom. I am 100% Italian. And we're like, but how do you know? Because I know. And there's but you have no evidence of this whatsoever. So I was always interested in genealogy, so I decided to do the DNA test. My father's side is French-Canadian, Acadians. And growing up, I always knew that my Acadian side was extremely well researched. There were Trahan family reunions, very, very well researched. So I knew that was there. As a child, when I'd ask my mother about records in Italy, she always used to say that those records were destroyed in earthquakes. Those records don't exist anymore. Who knows where they are? So I never gave it any deep thought. I never thought I would be able to discover my Italian side of my tree until I started. So to answer, to meander around and get to your question, I didn't know that the Italian records were kept by the Mormon Church. And I actually started to go to the research centers and discovered that the village that my family was from, all the records were online. And I started going backwards, and one by one, all of a sudden, my Italian tree blossomed and grew beyond my expectations, which was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, that's great. So now is your mom direct from Italy, or her parents?
Her parents are. I made my mother take the DNA test as well, which was great. My father has been passed for a dozen years now. And she is the firstborn here. Both of her parents, my grandparents, Grazia Concetta Botafogo and Antonio Lapori, both came from Sant'Angelo, Alaska. At different times, interestingly enough. My grandfather is 18 years older than my grandmother. He came over here from Sant'Angelo in 1910, November, December of 1910. And my grandmother was born in the village in January 1911. So they actually didn't meet each other until they were in Boston by 1930. But they were both from the same village.
So that's interesting. So did they have, mutual friends or relatives that they introduced them?
The backstory to my grandfather, Antonio Lapori, is when he arrived here in Boston, and actually he came directly to Boston because again, the argument with my beautiful, wonderful Italian mother was he went to Ellis Island, and that's what he told his children. But in my research, I found that he didn't go to Ellis Island. He actually came directly to Boston in 1910, and he was 17 years old. And in around, I want to say 1918, 1919, he married his first wife. And she and he had a daughter, my Aunt Jerry. But then a few years after my Aunt Jerry was born, his first wife, Maria Michela Morella, who was actually born here in Massachusetts, passed away in 1928. So it left my grandfather a widower with a young daughter, at the age of, how old was he? In his early 30s. So he was a widower in his early 30s. And then in 1930, my grandmother came over, and I'm assuming her father and him knew each other, my grandfather, her father, and my grandfather, and some sort of agreement, arrangement, meet my daughter, and she was 19 at the time, and he was 37, and they met, and they got married New Year's Eve, 1930, and were married all the way until his death in 1976.
Yeah, that's a cool story. And in my research, I found a couple of connections where you have to kind of piece things together a little bit.
Yeah.
But I found that my great grandparents, his uncle and her aunt got married, and there's no direct evidence of this, but you have to assume that my grandparents, maybe they went to a party, or maybe they even attended the wedding or a family gathering or something, where his uncle, her aunt were there, or they were invited and they met, and that's how they wound up getting married. So in those families, I'm actually, with some of those cousins, we're related on both sides of the family.
That happens a lot on my Acadian side. And I've noticed a little bit of pedigree collapse on the Italian side, but I can only go so far back in the records that are available online now. So I think if I could go back further, I would find a little bit more evidence of pedigree collapse.
Well, probably most likely, especially in a small town like that. So do you have any idea why your grandfather came?
Yes, I do, because as the story was told to me by my aunts, he had, with my grandmother, he had 4 more daughters. So he had 5 daughters in all. My Aunt Jerry from the first marriage, my Aunt Mary, my mother Eleanor, my Aunt Teresa, and my Aunt Linda. From the stories from them, at that point in, let's say, early 1900s, southern Italy was extremely poor, and there was not much opportunity. And he decided, the place to go was America, to come to the United States and to, make a go of it here, because there just was nothing. It's a very small village, Sant'Angelo, it's very, very small. So he came here, for work, to start a life, and that's how he got here. As told by my aunts.
Yeah, and it's interesting why they came on my mom's side. They were from Bari, and they came because my grandfather had come. My grandfather had served in the war in Libya in the early 1900s, and World War One was looking, more and more like it was going to happen, or had just happened. And my grandmother told him, "Well, you're not going to war again. We're going to go to America." And but they left my uncle behind, my oldest uncle, with his grandparents, and he didn't see his parents again for 45 years. And his whole family was born in Italy, in Torito, and
my grandfather never returned. I don't think he ever saw his parents again. I have found records of his parents ever coming here for a visit. And he left at 17 and never went back. My grandmother did go back in the late 70s or early 80s with my Aunt Jerry on like a Colette tour of the village. But according to my grandmother at that time, she said, "Oh, the whole village had changed. It wasn't the same." And you leave somewhere for 50 years and then go back. It's never the same.
No, no, of course not. And a couple of my cousins have gone back, and it's not the same, but they knew pretty much where everything was. The town didn't change that much as far as, I guess, the streets and finding their way around and all of that. And on my dad's side, my my grandmother came from two noble families, and I could never figure out why she came. And I've been doing this for quite some time. And finally, I found that her aunt had come in 1905. And there's only two Piramalo families in the United States that I found that came, early on. There may be a few more now, but and I said, well, that must have been it. Her aunt had come. I must have said, it's nice here and you should come. And they packed up and went. So, and that family, my oldest uncle and two oldest aunts were born in Italy, and my father and the youngest daughter were born in America. So they were kind of split, as far as that went.
Right. It's interesting. The majority of my family came over, and in the Boston area, there is a good amount of Sant'Angelese people from the village in the Boston area, even though they don't realize it. And my grandfather, everyone came over except his sister, who stayed in the village. And on my grandmother's side, everyone came over. All of her siblings came over, including her parents. And those are a few of the pictures I had shared with you. Her siblings, things like that. But they all came over. My great grandmother, from what I understand, she did not want to come over. She wanted to stay in Sant'Angelo. She was very unhappy to move to America by the 1960s. She was not happy at all. She wanted to stay in the village.
Well, that's not surprising, I guess.
Yeah, she had some land there and didn't want to really give it up.
So you mentioned you did the DNA. Did you find anything through Ancestry that surprised you or you didn't know about? Or?
What I found most surprising about my family, and I realize, and I'll put this right out there right away, I'm very blessed, very lucky. My family, it seems, did not leave this village for 200 years. I have literally spent my whole research time in one village. Both sides of my family, my grandmother and grandfather's side, lived in that village, all, their great-grandparents, all prior to 1809. So I have not really, I had to look beyond this one very small mountain town. And that's what kind of made my research easy. And through it, I've met several distant cousins who now live in the United States, in Connecticut, in southern Massachusetts, and we're all like second and third cousins, all from the same village. And they have aspects of their families that come from other villages around. But I seem to be the only one that my entire family is from one village and never moved until my grandparents.
Yeah, and that's not real surprising. I know on my mom's side, basically there were two villages close, Torito and Acquaviva dell'Elefante, and the same thing. Everybody comes from those two towns going back, 250 years or whatever it is.
Well, it's funny. My modern day cousins who I've met through Ancestry, Michael Luis, who's related to my grandmother and my mother, he's in several different towns. I help him look in different towns. I have another cousin, Allison, who's in Connecticut. She has relatives in other villages around. And I'm like, I've got them all in one place. They're all conveniently in one town. So for genealogy purposes, it's very simple for me.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. Yeah, and that's true. You know, my dad's family, the Sorrentinos, which took me a long time to find, and actually I got some help to do that. But my grandmother's family, her father and her mother, because they were nobility, they kind of had tentacles out through various places. But that being said, it was very, very easy to track them once I found the right link. The most interesting one that I found on her side was her grandmother, her maternal grandmother, was from Switzerland, Lucerne. And I was like, I'm never going to find Lucerne.
Right.
This is just going to be a dead end. I know it. I was going through, sometimes you probably found the same thing. Sometimes you just hit on something by accident. And I found these books that listed the officers in the Neapolitan army in the 1800s, before unification. And I found Bernardo Moore. And it said that he was a captain in the Swiss Guard in Naples. And so I kept researching, and then finally I found him on a record. They had it misspelled, but I found him on the Antonani. And I found my great-grandmother.
Wow, that's great.
So it gets even more interesting because once I found that out, and I found that my great-grandfather, similar to your story, he was a lieutenant in the Neapolitan army at the same time. So he must have been a young lieutenant. Her father was a captain, and they must have met someplace. So I was browsing around again, and I saw something on Google that said, if you have any question about Swiss ancestry, send us an email in English, Italian, German, whatever, and we'll answer it. So I put these names in there, and the person sent me back links to all the families in Lucerne, Switzerland, one of them being my great-grandmother's, and I was able to trace her family back to the 1400s through that.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And they had it all documented with family trees and all the names. So not only did I find the Moore name, but I found all of these other names. And I always thought, the Swiss Guard, they take care of the Pope, right? But apparently, especially Lucerne, but the Catholic cantons would hire out their soldiers as mercenaries.
Oh, yes.
To Germany, Italy, France, and that's how he wound up. He wound up being there.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Antonati website. Once that came online, then of course researching from home became wonderful. A cup of coffee and the computer.
Yes,
and I was able to really blow my tree out back many generations. The furthest back I have is I'm looking at it right now as we speak. Sirocco Penta, who is my seventh great grandfather. And the oldest record I've come across was Agnesa Penta, his daughter, who died in 1818. Actually, I have one that's earlier than that, but I call it the 1809 line when the record started after Napoleon. And that was my goal, to get everything as far back to the 1809 line as I could, because then the next step would be to go to Italy at some point.
Right. We were supposed to be there in April.
Yeah. My cousin Michael was supposed to be there this summer as well.
And we had a whole tour set up. We were going to go to, because some of these homes are still there, and we were going to go to Avellino, and I hired somebody who does this. she calls it Italy rooting, and she actually brings you back in time. She's not just a genealogist, but she also tries
Right.
to recreate things. And
Oh, wow.
we were gonna have lunch with like 20 some odd, third and fourth cousins that I found,
Right.
and it's just so
Yeah.
disappointing. So we were hoping
Yeah.
to go in October, but I don't know if
Yeah.
that's going to happen now.
That happened. Yeah, I know.
So,
I do still have, because my cousin Michael has been back to Sant'Angelo a few times. He's been there a couple of times. And my other cousin Allison has been there as well. We do have distant cousins who still live there, whom I've said hello to on Facebook, which is nice. There are still a few distant cousins living in the village, even though it's right now it's a population of I think of about 800 people live in the village. So it's Facebook, the internet has really opened up the ability to connect to so many people.
oh no, it's been terrific for me, especially on my dad's mom. Um,
Hmm.
my mom's family, almost everybody came here. We have some very,
Right.
very, very distant, um, but with my dad's mom, I was able to find a ton of people and
Mm.
connect with them, and talk with them, and exchange photos and exchange
Yep.
uh, documents. I know on the invite I had that picture on the invite was my great grandfather's. I say it's calling card,
Right.
um, but my grandmother brought a box of those when she came over, and
Mm.
I was able to find cousins who had one had a similar card, although my card is probably from maybe around the early 1900s. The one
Right.
that he had was probably from the 1960s, but
Right.
has the same crest and the same thing on it.
Oh,
And
that's nice.
they had a couple of pieces of memorabilia.
Yeah, that's nice.
So, what was the most amazing thing that you found?
Well, back to kind of the beginning. The amazing thing was that these records existed. That was beyond thrilling. So I would go to the family research libraries, and I started to work. And then when Antonati started to come online 2 years ago, um, then everything took off. Just the fact that I could fill in my tree for the most part, because I've got an interesting little side story. My grandmother's grandfather, Michael Buttafuoco, which the name Buttafuoco stands out because it is not an Avellino name. It's a Sicilian name.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and he was, according to the story, which again I argue with my mother about this all the time. Michael, my grandmother's father, was a foundling left on the doorstep. This man, also named Michael Buttafuoco, took him in and raised him as his own. He was supposed to be an older gentleman, which I'm assuming he was maybe in his 40s. And he raised my great grandfather. When my great grandfather was a young teenager, allegedly, the family who he belonged to came back for him, and it was supposed to be the Vitali family. And he said, "No, I will not go with you. This man has raised me, and I am staying here with him." Um, but to me, that something is amiss in the story, because he's the only Buttafuoco in the village. I can't find the great great grandfather, the adoptive father's death record anywhere. And I don't understand where this man who clearly comes from outside of this village was all of a sudden there, and then a baby appears on his step. And, it's like it's extremely confusing. The story, it doesn't make any sense. I try to use DNA, using my mother's DNA and my DNA. Clearly, my great grandfather was from that area. He was born in that area because we have like no Sicilian blood, no Northern Italian blood. It's all there. So that's one of the roadblocks or mysteries I've been trying to solve, is who was my great grandfather's real parents. So
Wow,
there's that.
that is pretty interesting.
Yeah,
And
no, it makes just zero sense that a man from out of this village up in the mountains is there, and then all of a sudden he's raising a child, but that's the story. That's what I got to go on. So, you know,
Well, that's very similar to, and I don't know if you ever heard of him, with Giovanni Martino,
No.
who was actually at Little Bighorn with Custer.
Oh.
And he was also a foundling.
Uh-huh.
And his father came for him,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't go. And
Yeah.
he eventually came to America.
Oh, wow.
And he survived Little Bighorn.
Right.
I have a story
Right.
about it in the blog, but he survived Little Bighorn because
Mhm.
they sent him back to go. It was either to go tell somebody else where they were, or go
Mhm.
tell them we ain't coming back. One or the other, I forget.
Right.
But there were actually 7 Italians
Hmm.
with Custer.
I did
Surprisingly
not realize
enough.
that.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was. And I was doing a story on something else, and I came across it, and I said, "Wow, this is like some really
Yeah.
interesting story." Yeah.
Yeah, and it is interesting, and I get little bits of like my mother's first cousin. Um, she now lives in North Carolina, and she gave me a little bit more of the story. I sent you a picture of a wedding, and that is her father, my uncle Vinny, and his wife, my aunt Eleanor. And way over to the left are my great grandparents who came from Sant'Angelo, and she had a story from her father, my uncle Vinny, um, that he, my great grandfather, was an only child, which kind of makes a little sense. I can't seem to find any DNA matches, to go into that Buttafuoco / Vitale family line. But it just seems that Italian Americans don't do the DNA test as much. I wish more would. My Acadian side, everyone has done it. There's thousands of French Canadian, thousands. I've got thousands of cousins to choose from. But the Italian American side, it seems like it hasn't caught on with the Italian Americans to do the DNA.
Well, the Italians don't do it at all.
At all, yeah. I wish they
None
would.
of them do it. Me too.
Yeah.
I've been begging them to try and get at least a
Yeah.
couple to do it. The Puerto Ricans do it a lot because my wife is
Yep.
half Puerto Rican, and she's got a bazillion.
Yeah, I've got a bazillion Acadian cousins to choose from. I couldn't throw a rock without hitting an Acadian cousin. But yeah, I wish the Italian Americans and the Italians back in the village did the DNA test, because that would solve everything if I could get a good batch of DNA going.
So I'm glad you brought up the Acadians because very interesting. So what have you found on that side? I'm sure there's some really interesting things there.
Yeah, everything. The Acadian side is very well documented. I've begotten my tree. I set gold posts for myself. 1809 line for the Italian side, and on the Acadian side, all first arrivals. So I've traced back to all the first arrivals in the 1600s who came to Nova Scotia. So that puts a couple generations further beyond my Italian. But the first Trahan, Guillaume Trahan, came to Nova Scotia in 1636. And he is all Trahans go back to him in North America for the most part. If you see anybody or meet anybody, or anybody listening has the last name Trahan, we all go back to Guillaume Trahan. And just the family names, LeBlanc, Bellevue, all French, Canadian, Nova Scotian names. And a lot of them are around here. They came to the Boston area. I'm a school teacher, and I realize now several of my students are distant cousins on the Acadian side. And I realize several of my students are distant cousins on the Italian side. I have Vizella, Iannuzzo, and looking around now at my class roster, I realize, oh my gosh, I'm related to these kids distantly, but I'm related to these kids who are now my students, and they have no idea, that we're connected.
That's too funny. So
Yeah.
With that, I would think, have you been able to trace the family name back to France? Because I would think that there would be some interesting background there too, just like
There is,
with Gateway ancestors through America.
Yeah, I have. On the French side, like I said, my goal has been to, through actual documents, get back to the first settlers. And with Guillaume Trahan, he came from Bonneville. Oh, I can't even pronounce it. Somewhere, and his father Nicholas Trahan, and that's where the trail ends. Nicholas Trahan, which would be in the 1500s. But right now, I'm just stopping because, like I said, I've been doing this for about 3 years. I'm just stopping at the first arrival, and then once I get all of that in order, then I'll take a breath and then I'll start going through the French records and seeing who's there. But I kind of want to get everybody, you know, to the first arrival, which is a lot of pedigree collapse, which is the problem I'm stumbling into, since it was, just say about 100 families that came to Nova Scotia in the 1600s, and everyone comes off of them. So
Right. So
it's a
this,
lot.
so Guillaume, was he just a settler, or was
He
he?
was, yeah, he was. There's so much. It's actually a lot of information on him. He was a tradesman. He did. I forget what he did, but he was a worker. He came with his wife, second wife, and a daughter from a first marriage, and a child, and then had several more children here. Um, and like I said, he was one of the first families in 1636 to arrive here, along with the LeBlancs, the Heberts, the Blanchards, Landry. The names go on and on and on. But a lot of history there is, there was the displacement of the Acadians with the wars between Britain and France. There was a lot of fighting, and the Acadians were dispersed in the 1750s, sent out of Nova Scotia. Many came to Boston, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and my family, of course, was affected. They were sent to Boston as refugees, and then once the war was over, they went back to Nova Scotia. But a lot of Acadians stayed, and then some went to Louisiana and became the Cajuns.
We'll be right back.
Lafayette, we are here. The French history podcast for the American public by a Frenchman. Learn all about France's fascinating history, its great characters like Charlemagne, Joan of Arc, Louis XIV, or Napoleon, but also the great events that marked France, Europe, and sometimes the whole world. Lafayette, we're here. Available wherever you get your podcast or on LafayettePodcast.com. À bientôt.
Right. I was going to say, yeah, they went to Louisiana.
Which all the Trahans down there related to as well. There are a lot of Trahans in Louisiana and Texas, a lot.
Wow, that's a good story. Yeah, my kids are adopted, and I started. My son's a dead end because we don't know who his
Right.
parents are.
Right.
My daughter wanted to meet her birth parents, which she did when she was 18, and we found out that she's a descendant of Daniel Boone and Captain Morgan.
Wow. That's a combo.
Isn't
That's
it?
quite a combo. That's exciting.
But I was able to get her back to Europe and pretty far actually because of those connections. Because Daniel Boone comes from families back in England.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'd mentioned to you where I teach right outside of Boston. I teach in a small town about 20 minutes out of Boston. And this September, I've started a new course, Genealogy, and I have about 20 students who have signed up. So I'm very excited to see who I'm going to get and what I'm going to get and what we're going to find. like who's a descendant, who came on the Mayflower, who just got here. It's going to be it's going to be very interesting. And of course, the prize will be if they can trace anything back to me. If you can prove that you're related to the teacher, then I'll give you the automatic A. So So
that's
I'm
cool.
sure
So you have that flexibility to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not going to get the A, but
No, I didn't mean the A. I mean just to have the class.
Yeah. Yes. It's brand new. It's starting this September. I kind of wish we weren't in the middle of a pandemic to do it, because I'm not sure how we're starting back. But this will be the beginning. I can't even say the word. Inauguration of this class in September of 2020, and I'm very, very excited to get young people involved in genealogy.
Right. So there's, I have a very interesting podcast with a person by the name of Kai White, and it's the one that says, "Was Ragnar real?" And if you listen to that, Kai is a very, very interesting guy. He's in Texas. He's a West Point grad. And he researches gateway ancestors. So it might be very interesting for you if somebody in this class actually traces back, to England with a gateway ancestor. Kai does these super cool charts that he did one for me, and he uses the family crests, and he's mostly, he mostly does, U.S. gateway, Revolutionary War type of people. But when I gave him, and I don't take anything for granted, I have to have documentation or I don't buy it. But when I sent him my Italian ancestors and I said, I think this, Prince Marino goes back to, actually it's even earlier than Prince Marino, but I said, I think these people go back to the heads of Europe. And, he said, yeah, you're right. And he said, I could do a chart for you because I have that documented. But he might be a good guy to
trust
look at.
Trust me, your podcasts are going to be at least a couple of assignments for my students.
Oh boy, I appreciate that.
Trust me. Yeah, they are.
Well, especially
if we're doing remote learning. Yes, we're definitely doing it.
Well, especially the Italians, they might find some of the blogs interesting. But I'll tell you what, I mean, when you start, I'd be more than happy if you want to, write a guest blog or do something like that. I mean, feel free, and
well, it's very exciting because it's all brand new. So who knows where this could take off to for them,
right? Or even if you wanted to have them write something and publish it, I'm more than happy to do that if it comes to that. So that would be, definitely. I think that would be fun.
Yes, no, it is, and like I said, to getting these young people involved early, that's back to kind of like our own research. I'm 50 right now, and I started when I was 47, 48. I wish I had started younger, when my Uncle Vinny was alive. When even though I knew stuff from my father when he was alive, but I wish I had started younger. I hope these kids will have a great advantage of having great aunts and great uncles who are still with them, who can maybe, fill in a lot for them. And then we can prove it out to be true or false.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, in my case, I always thought I was going to find Nicola Piramalo and find a little something about him. When I found my great grandmother, I didn't know, because I had never heard the name Caracciolo. And my cousin lived with my grandparents, and I'm almost 70. My grandmother died in 1960 something when I was about 12. But I asked my cousin, "Did you ever hear of this name?" And she says, "Of course, that was Nanny's mother." And the family goes back, and they had a saint, and they had an admiral, and all of this kind of stuff. So when I started finding her family, her line goes back to 950 in Naples, all documented. It's all documented. And it was just unbelievable to find this kind of stuff. And then I was talking to my oldest cousin, who also lived with my grandmother. They had a 2-family house. They lived downstairs. And he said, "Oh, she used to tell us that her cousin was the princess. We thought she was just, a batty old lady.
Right.
But it was true."
Yeah. That's the exciting thing is, that's going to be like one of our first assignments is gather up the stories. And then, let's see if they're true or false. So like, for instance, in my family, the story that was handed down, my aunt, Jerry, my mother, my grandfather came to New York City. He didn't have enough money. He only had enough money to get to Hartford. He could barely afford to buy a carton of milk, saved up some money, and then came to Boston, was what we were always told. Then in my research, there was zero evidence of him being in New York, being in Hartford. And all I found was in his own documents that he wrote, the naturalization things and the ship manifest, he came directly to Boston. And I said to my mother, I said, "Mom," I said, "no, it looks like your father came directly to Boston." And we argued for a good month, no, as I was told, we went to Ellis Island, there's a brick with his name in it. And I'm like, well, that's all wonderful, Mother dear, but he didn't go to New York City. Grandma went to New York City and then came to Boston, but Grandpa didn't. And I'd show her the ship manifest. I showed her the naturalization papers. I showed him his citizenship papers. And in every document, it says, came to Boston. No mention of New York. And so, the family story of Grandpa came through Ellis Island, had a horrible time, and all this doesn't turn out to be a true story. It just turns out to be a family legend that was fabricated somewhere along the line.
Yeah, and whether it was, just by accident or just assumed that everybody came through Ellis Island.
Oh, no. My grandfather said it. I think.
Oh, he did say, yeah.
No. He said, he's like, oh, yeah. I think he just went along with his daughters, whatever they said. He was just like, yep. Oh, yeah, New York. He didn't come through New York, but I think he just kind of humored them. And it's like, yep. And he had no desire to go back to Italy. He was the one who was, we're in America now, we are American, and we're going to move forward. So he really had no desire to go back to Italy. Boston became his home. And that's where his heart was, his family and his daughters, and even his 2 siblings were here as well. So.
Well, my uncle wanted to go back with my aunt just for a visit back to Toledo, and she said, "I don't want to go." She didn't even want to go for a visit.
Yeah, no, she didn't want to go. I was hoping to go. I would like to go. I would very much like to go, just to walk the same streets that my grandparents and great-grandparents walked, just to see the sunset over the mountains that they saw.
Of course, yeah.
I would definitely like to do that at some point. Luckily, I've still got plenty of time to get there. Just once all the borders open and everything's good again.
Everything goes back to semi-normal at least. Yeah,
and luckily, being a school teacher, I have the summers off, so I can plan a nice couple-week getaway and spend. Because my idea of exploring would to actually stay in the village for at least a week, just be there, just to experience what it's like to be in that village, to try to experience the same things that they experienced, the rains, the sunrises, the sunsets, things like that. Those are the things that interest me, as well as looking at hopefully church records. If I could get into the churches to see the church records, that would be great. Yeah,
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Paul. This has been fascinating. Yeah. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the class. I think that's awesome. I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely be reaching out to you for sure.
Sounds good. Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook in the Italian Genealogy group or at www.italiangenealogy.blog.